So we're at the legume and oilseed herbicide tolerance trial. This is one of the longest trials within the Hart field site. It's been going since 1982. It keeps expanding because obviously there's more and more herbicides, but currently we've got 50 herbicide treatments.
Up at this northern end, we've got the IBS timing. Generally speaking, lots of the IBS herbicides were safe to the 17 different varieties that we have through here. We've got some existing chemistry here, so the trifloraline, Sakura, Boxagold, propizamide, butazan and Devronol C that you may have heard of, all fairly safe. The crops did tolerate those chemistries to a certain degree. We've got the new pre-M herbicide from Adama, Ultra, a new Group E that will be released next year, also safe across the board, so that will be registered for grasses. Moving into some of the newer chemistry, so Luxamax and Overwatch are also present at this IBS end of the trial, which is registered only for wheat. You'll see that it's also shown good crop safety. Moving along past Luxamax is Overwatch, the new Group Q from FMC. It does have a canola registration as well as cereals and wheat and barley, that is, and it's also proven to be safe. Century, the IMI crops were tolerant to Century as expected. We're finishing up the IBS section with terrain, which interestingly we did see some tolerance to terrain in the 4 varieties of canola.
Sakura, 118 grams, now registered on quite a few legumes. Andre brought up a good point. It's interesting to keep track of the groups, particularly for our pre-emergent. Where I come from on the York Peninsula, we've got resistance to the Group J's, which is your trilate and your prosulfocarb or Boxagold type products. Trifloraline disappeared about 20 years ago, so we've got a bit of glypho and that resistance as well. So Trifloraline Group D, Sakura Group K, Boxagold. And this is one of the interesting points, Damo, that the vetch and canola historically do show up quite a big crop effects, but they haven't in this particular one. So Boxagold Group J predominantly with the prosulfocarb with a bit of Group K in it. Propizamide, very safe on all legumes and canola. I generally turn this one a Group D plus, whereas trifloraline Group D minus. That's just a personal thing because propizamide we haven't got resistance to for ryegrass, whereas through this neck of the woods as well as York Peninsula, highly resistant trifloraline. My main concern is legume followed by canola if it's getting used 2 consecutive years. What we've learnt down in the southeast is that because it's rapidly broken down by microbial activity, it's actually the microbes that breed up and break the chemical down. So if you're going into a secondary year of propizamide and those microbes are at a high level already, you could probably expect a poor result. So it won't be resistant, it's just that there's a lot of microbes around breaking it down. Damo touched on this one, the new Adama product, Ultra. I'm pretty excited about this one being a legume and canola herbicide tolerant trial. We haven't had a new pre-emergent solely for legumes for quite a while. Group E chemistry, so we get a chance to rotate our groups around again. Carbetamide is the active, and I guess from my experience, really good on brome grass, a lot better than propizamide, and really good on ryegrass as well. It doesn't need as much moisture as propizamide to sort of activate. Reflex is a new chemistry coming in, which is good on fumetry. Look, if trifloraline still works, you could add that, and if you're out early enough with a brodal even, like post-emergent, you could use that as well.
It is something just to be aware of with some of this newer chemistry. It is some of those broadleaf weeds that they do have weaknesses on. So things like wireweed and fumetry and things you just need to be aware of, otherwise they'll become the problematic weed. So certainly that's where a mixture with the pre-emergence, thinking about what their strengths and weaknesses are, would be well worth it.
We do have Syngenta's new product, Reflex, legumes only. Reflex is a Group G, so There seems to be forever new Group Gs coming out, but we're learning they're all that little bit different. For those lentil growers, you do have to be careful with the use or application of reflex. Lentils are a lot more sensitive, even though where Chris is standing it doesn't actually look that bad, but you can only use 1 litre IBS, whereas all the other pulses you're up to 1.5 litres, and it definitely cannot be used as a post-sow pre-emergent. It's just too much risk of crop damage in the lentils. But with the other pulses you can go up to, I think it's 1 litre post-sow pre-em. I've had a look at a couple of trials over home as well, and the exciting thing for me is not only the brassica control, but what it's doing for bifora. Reflex might give us an opportunity to get away from the IMI or Group B chemistry chasing bifora. Again, I would have thought there'd be more canola control, but we're thinking that because the reflex is all being placed in the row and we haven't had much rain afterwards, that's why the canolas got through. There is a bit of a dip there again, but you wouldn't use your reflex on your own canola.
I'll touch on the next 3 treatments. First, we have Luxamax here, and Luxamax doesn't really have any activity on broadleaf weeds, which is why we're seeing selectivity across these 17 varieties here. In cereals, of course, that treated soil seed separation is really important for safety with Luxamax. Overwatch, the FMC product, a Group Q, it does have activity on broadleaf weeds, although across the 17 different varieties in this trial, we did see good crop safety. Early on, the 6 week after sowing assessment, there was some damage early on, just some Group Q bleaching, but as Chris said earlier today, that's certainly nothing to worry about, particularly in canola where Overwatch does have a registration. Interesting point about the Callisto in this trial. This particular plot really demonstrated the long-lasting residual of this new Group H from Syngenta. So the first assessment of Callisto saw slight to moderate damage across some of the susceptible plants. And then at the 12-week after sowing assessment, we did see that pick up. So yeah, that does demonstrate the long-lasting residual of Callisto there. Moving into Century, into rain, selectivity from the IMI crops as expected. And the terrain there, a point of interest would be the canola, which hasn't been touched up as possibly expected.
When we start getting into some IMI chemistry, it pays to cast your eye across the plots. The first 3 lentils, we've got a new Lentil tolerant lentil hallmark, and the jumbos as the furthest one back. So you can see the jumbos just can't tolerate the IMI chemistry, whereas the other 2, the first one you've got stacked IMI and Lentil or chlorpyrrolid tolerance, and then your normal hallmark IMI there. And the same can be said with the canolas. We've got 2 canolas that are, one is stacked resistance, triazine and IMI, and the other's just a plain IMI, and it's the Century's actually killed the other 2 that don't have that tolerance. So something to keep in mind as we're going across. If we talk about an IMI, just cast your eye across those different ones.
Take this into consideration that this was sown end of May. There was no rain until about mid-June, then only 38 mil for June, July. And then it wasn't until the last week in August, 67 mil fell. So a lot of this chemistry hasn't behaved how you would traditionally see in a traditional rainfall period. So it either was dry or it didn't get to where the wheat seeds are or where the crop seed is. So both I'm concerned about it's not showing the crop effect that you would often see, and it's also can impact the weed control as well.
And I think the classic there, Andre, this is the nil treatment here, and you sort of cast your eye either side, and some of them just look like a nil treatment. And the classic is the next one, the Diron. Yeah. Damo, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so Diron, that 6 week after sowing assessment, we saw selectivity in both the conventional canola, the quartz, as well as the Pioneer 44Y90, the Clearfield variety. So that was a point of interest in the Diron. But the same can be said for the other Group G products in this PSPE section. Metribuzin and Simazine, similar results were observed.
Simazine, metribuzin and turbine. So like Damo said, the Group C triazines, whereas Diron is in the Group C urease. Again, you would have expected anything that doesn't have the triazine tolerance. So in particular, the canolas back there, that they should have been controlled, but again, lack of moisture activation, and the canola has got through.
So moving on to balance plus simazine selectivity in the beans, peas and chickpea at 6 weeks after sowing. So at that first assessment, things have changed. Helmiro TX, terbuthalazine and isoxaflutol is the next treatment. We did see early on in the beans there was some selectivity. Now you can see that those beans are behind. We're into the post-M, and this was the early application at 3 to 4 node. And so in this first plot here we have simazine moving into metribuzin and broad strike. So interestingly, canola is a little bit behind in that group C post-M application.
I think it just mirrors, particularly with the metribuzin here as well, just what we were seeing with the post-sow pre-Ms, that moisture activation, particularly with the triazines, is key for weed control, in which these two plots, the canola should have been a weed and should have been controlled.
Moving into the broad strike section here, we've got severe to plant death in the conventional and in the TT canola. Some selectivity observed there in the 44Y90 and the CT canola, and then moving through the plots here up this end, we see, well, slight to moderate damage in some of the legumes and selectivity there in the lentils.
If you look at the vetch, for anyone that uses broad strike in lentils, like the best you can aim for is really that suppression of vetch or biomass reduction, and hope that the lentils sort of grow over it. Particularly if you look at the simazine 2 plots back behind Damo, then the metribuzin, you sort of come down again, and then broad strike even further.
Fistrol, Dold with Banjo from New Farm, registered in clover, which is why the clover rep here was ranked as no damage. In the rest of the varieties here, you can see that they're behind relative to the plots next door. Registered in Medic as of yesterday. Brodal options, both reps here of Brodal, one without MCPA, one with. We see moderate damage in the canola varieties across the board there, and we also see some moderate damage in the jumbo lentils. Selectivity can be observed in the peas, in the hallmark lentils, and slight to moderate damage in the clover medic vetch up this end.
Just as a point of registration, Brodal's registered in lentils and peas, but as soon as you add the MCPA AIM on, it's only in peas. So you wouldn't go trying this one in your lentils.
Moving back into some IMI chemistry, we've got Spinnaker and Raptor here. These are both reading fairly crop tolerance of to these products where that IMI herbicide tolerance is present.
A quick note, you can pick up the changes with your jumbos, but the chickpeas in particular, Spinnaker isn't registered as a post-M, so you can see the effect, I'll call it, of the Spinnaker, whereas the Raptor one here has almost taken the chickpeas completely out. And when you cast your eye again, right back at the end of the canola, anything that doesn't have the IMI tolerance has been controlled by these two.
Some interesting results with EcoPar, registered in beans and peas at that 6 weeks after sowing. Some moderate damage was observed in the peas and selectivity in the beans. And then when we move to the 5 to 6 node post-M application, we see that is in fact reversed. Intercept, we see crop tolerance where IMI herbicide tolerance is present. We see severe damage to the canola, for example, that doesn't have that clear field trait.
Just one thing to add, I know a lot of intercepts get supplied over IMI tolerant crops to take out medic, but you have got a sulfonylurea tolerant strand of medic here. No surprise that it actually has tolerated that intercept quite well. Vetches, I've tended to find it's sort of hit and miss. If you get it out really early, you will see some good control, if not really good suppression. So in this sense, it might have been just a touch late for that application.
So the Group B Saracen from New Farm, which hasn't yet been commercialised in Australia, was the most robust at this 3 to 4 node timing. Pretty evident. You can see that at that 6 week after sowing assessment, Saracen was rated or ranked a 5 to 6 for each variety. So yeah, really strong on those volunteer legumes.
So the active in that one's fluazulam. So it is a group B, but it does offer a good alternative to clopyralid because it doesn't have the plant back restrictions and the straw tie up that clopyralid does, but obviously has good activity on volunteer legumes.
Absolutely, Andre, and it also, I guess, gives you the option if you want to put bromoxynil or LVE or a similar mixed partner in with it.
So we're now standing in the 5 to 6 node post-M application spot, starting with metsulfuron, aloe and weta. Any comments here, CD? Nothing out of the ordinary?
No, but it's probably just a take-home message, even if you have that IMI tolerance or better tolerance to sulfonylurea residues, that when you put a sulfonylurea over the top as a post-emergent, you can just see how affected all those IMI tolerant crops. Like the medic here, you can see the difference to the nil, and then once you go to your stacked resistance and the hallmark, you can see a huge biomass reduction. So it's just something that you wouldn't trial.
Moving into Lontrel, really strong on volunteer legumes. There is the new clopyralid tolerant lentil GIA 1703, which is what we're standing in front of here. And then Lontrel obviously not strong on brassicas, which is why the canola was ranked quite low, nil damage.
Yeah, we're still looking a couple of years away for that release, but again, I rarely get excited, but I am excited with that one, IMI and chlorpyrrolide tolerance. Close lentil rotations in particular, those hard to kill legumes just dominate, and tares and snail medic in particular are really hard seeded, so they'll just keep on coming. Lontrel's a dirty word in most legume rotations, I'll call it. As Damo said, canola, no problems. But this will just give us an option, and I guess we're not sure on what seed size or what disease package that it'll come with, but it'll probably start behind in terms of yield compared to some of the high yielding lentils, but just will be an option that I think will be taken up in some areas. Those that have used Affinity or the likes, you know, you go and spray a grass herbicide in your legumes, and if you haven't cleaned your boom out, you always have those strips for the first 100 metres in the paddock. But so it does scorch off the legumes, but they generally recover. Again, something that's not registered, and I wouldn't do it, but just an observation. Velocity and Talinor are sort of in the same marketplace, I'll call that, broadleaf weeds in cereals. When you actually have a look, you can see both strengths, as in velocity. When you look up at the canola, you can see how strong that is on the canola up there, or brassica, hence why it's classed as probably the best or one of the best for radish control. When you look at your Talinor here, you can see that it's maybe not as good on the canola, but a lot better on the legumes. So it's something to keep in mind when using either of these products, which is their strength and which is a possible weakness.
The first one after the nil is flight, or C mode of action plus F mode of action plus I mode of action. Selectivity in clovers relative to the nil, which is registered for. We also saw minimal crop damage in the peas and in the chickpeas, and some moderate damage there in the canola. So after flight is triathlon, so similar products, CFIs, again, minimal effect on the clover, again, that's a registration. Quadrant, here with Quadrant 1000 mil, we've got moderate to severe damage in the canola there, and then moving through to the other crops with Quadrant, we saw a lot of tolerance in the Bendoc beans early on, and moderate damage in the Samiras as well. The same can be said for the peas, which are behind there.
Probably just one other comment, Damo, as its name implies, it's got 4 modes of action in the actual drum, whereas these two here, the flight and the trifloraline, have 3. So you're getting that bit better control, particularly of the medics and the vetch, but some of the legumes as well.
The next one is frequency. It's a standalone Group H. Its label claim will be to use it with a base mixing partner, either bromoxynil to get that H plus C synergy similar to Talinor and Velocity, where we would expect to see similar results to those two products from behind us. But this plot here is frequency by itself, so just the tepromazone, and as you can see, slight to moderate effect across these 17 varieties. It's done a bit of a better job on the canola relative to the legumes up this end, and it's only registered in cereals.
With Pixaro, Damo, you almost wish you could mix the frequency and the Pixaro, because one of them's doing the canola and one of them's doing the legumes. So yeah, Pixaro have used a bit in the summer weed job, not as much early post-em, and it was particularly noticeable going into canola off of the lentils where the farmers had missed any of the boom spraying, because the legumes like the medic and the lentils were present. And he was quite worried at the time that it might have residual properties into the canola, but as you can see, no dramas at all with the canola. Very, very strong on legumes.
So the last two, Rexaid and Atlantis, some good observations can be made here, the difference between the SU chemistry and SA chemistry. CD, do you want to just touch on the difference between those two?
The three groups that we've looked at in Group B, you've got your IMIs, of course, you've got your sulfonyl amide, which is where Rexaid falls into, and your sulfonyl ureas, which we're all aware of. So yeah, you can just see quite a big difference, and again, just to ram home the difference between the IMI tolerant varieties. So we've got the two lentils, we've got the Our Star peas and the canolas. You can see that even with IMI tolerance, that the sulfonyl amides have really done quite a job of biomass suppression more than anything. The Jumbo 2 lentils are almost completely controlled. As soon as we go to the Atlantis on the far plot, even though it is a sulfonyl urea, you can just see that there's quite a bit of difference, and even the sulfonyl urea tolerant Sultan makes sense, I guess. It's tolerant to SUs, so there's better biomass there, but you can just see the difference between the three groups. So whether it's tolerant to IMIs or not tolerant, and then your sulfonyl amide versus this sulfonyl urea on my right here.